My name is Hoon Kim, and I'll be planting Anthem Church in Edison, New Jersey, in September 13th, 2020. And our vision is to be a missional, multi-ethnic, multiplying church. Something about me is that I grew up in Italy. My family has been in Italy for 46 years, but I attended the American School of Milan. And in my last 2 years of high school, my parents shipped me off to a prep school in Pennsylvania. And then I attended a American university. So I am Korean ethnically, but I grew up in Italy and I was educated in the United States. Now I'm planting a multi-ethnic church. And what I wanted to talk about today and think about was fundraising and maybe a contextualized fundraising. I have been assessed through these different church planting assessment centers, and now we're receiving training on how these best practices for fundraising are. And what I've realized is that one of the underlying assumptions of these cohorts, these books, this training material is that a lot of the fundraising material assumes that you will be fundraising in a Western culture to Westerners. And truth of the matter is, having grown up abroad and yet educated in the United States, the world is very diverse, and I'm assuming that some of the fundraising practices may not be as contextualized as they could be. So for example, I'm Korean American, Italian, and one of the distinctives of the Asian culture and Italian culture is that we are a very honor, shame culture, as opposed to perhaps American Western culture is more guilt-based. And generally speaking, what does that look like? I'll think about three things. Number one, in the Asian context, communication is oftentimes very indirect. In the American context, people just talk directly and to the point. That's one of them. A second aspect is that Asian, even Islamic cultures are much more communal, as opposed to Western American cultures, which are much more individualistic. So some of the distinctives are that Asian culture is very honor-shame, as opposed to Western American culture, which is what people call a guilt culture. Secondly, Asian cultures and even Islamic cultures, they tend to be much more communal, as opposed to American cultures, which highlight and champion the individual. So these three aspects, honor and shame, individual communal, direct and indirect communication styles, I believe they have a huge influence in the way that you fundraise and how you approach people. So for example, what does that look like? I'll give a couple generalizations. I don't know if you've ever watched K-pop versus American videos. In K-pop, there's tons of singers. Same thing in Bollywood, Indian music videos. There's usually a lot of dancers on stage. American music videos, there's usually a key persona. That's one of the examples. Another one is maybe in the American context, if a child doesn't get into a great school, a lot of times the parents say, oh, well, my kid maybe didn't study as much. And that's a guilt upon the child. In the Asian context, if your son doesn't make it in maybe a more prestigious institution, it becomes oftentimes internalized as shameful. So how do you take these elements and fundraise differently? Because in the American context, in the training that I received, the typical training assumes that you would get together one-on-one with an individual. You would share a little bit of your testimony, what God has done, what God is doing, and maybe your new calling. And then you would make the big ask. You would look at them straight in the eye and say, hey, would you become my partner? And you would even maybe define a specific amount. And then you would look at them in the eye, and then you would pause for silence. Well, I don't think that is the most effective way, perhaps, in the Asian context. So a couple of really practical ideas would be, I would probably, if I was fundraising, not do an individual fundraising unless they are very close and personal friends. Maybe an approach would be that you would gather 2 or 3 families that you know, and that you and maybe another one of the planting families would go out and have a communal dinner, and then you share the vision together. And then when you do make the ask, I would not ask for a specific amount. I would just ask them to ask God instead, and maybe spend some time in prayer for discernment. Lastly, in terms of fundraising, this was something that we discussed last night, some of us. It would be that if you could find somebody who would vouch for you and say, hey, I know this person, this maybe Asian American, maybe this Indian church planner, and he has an incredible vision. God has been moving in their life, and you can champion someone for them. That would leverage this indirect communication. A lot of times when you ask for a specific amount in the Asian context, that can be misinterpreted as maybe God's anointing is not on you, and it's shameful. Or they might even think in your mind, why are you asking for money? Why aren't you suffering and working for that? When the reality of fundraising is that it's a full-time job. If you want to launch healthy churches, sometimes you want to have a healthy birth, which requires money and financing. So these are 3 thoughts about contextualized fundraising, not just in the American Western cultural context, but much more in a global Asian, Indian, Islamic culture context. Well, I'm still in the beginning of fundraising, but through some of the people that I have ministered to in the past, they have been very generous. They said, hey, I know who you are, I know what you do, I know your vision, and can I please just blow wind in your sails and help you go further and faster. Some of the organizations that I'm involved with, what they do is they strategically connect you with bigger churches that have church planting funds, and through the assessment that they have put you through, they vouch for you and they put you in front of some of these big organizations. I just got back from Colorado. There's a big church there, and they have an organization called 1,000 Churches, and I'm still waiting to hear back. But if that goes through, it'll be a big amount. Still waiting. A testimony in progress. Church planting organizations that I'm connected with is called Stadia. They assessed me, and one of their philosophies is that yes, church planting is expensive, and most church plants, I believe the failure rate is that 6 out of church plants never make it to year 4. Now Stadia has a 90% success rate with church plants because they have this model where, if I could use giving birth as a model, they want you to have a healthy weight from the beginning. So they ask you to do a pretty big funding campaign. The way that I've done it is I have gone through the big organizations first, church planting networks and the denominations, because typically those big organizations take a lot more time to make a decision. Then I've gone to individual churches and partner churches, developed relations with them, especially if the churches were in the local region. And now, for me personally, now that I'm in month 4 of fundraising, now I'm beginning to go more with a personal fundraising, because that's more, it's more quick. I can just ask them, and I'll start with those people that I have a strong relationship with, and then find those people that I have maybe not been so in touch in the last few years. For example, my youth group students in the past, my college students in the past, and ask them to partner with me.